Hello, I'm Melanie Hastings in for Bruce DuPoy today. Coming up, the Republican presidential candidates are in full-scale revolt against their party and the media organizations who have hosted their debates. We're going to hear what they're demanding and what President Obama has to say about their complaints with senior political reporter Scott Duman. And then helping the district's homeless families and veterans during the winter. We'll discuss Mayor Bowser's plan to assist those seeking shelter as the temperature drops below freezing.
From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DuPoy.
Hello and welcome to News Talk. It's good to have you with us today. And we start with the 2016 presidential campaign. Ben Carson is ahead of Donald Trump in the latest national poll, now the first or second choice of half of all Republican voters. And while the campaigns do get out over the upcoming debate rules, many candidates are now saying that they won't sign on to a plan that they just agreed to a night before. The debate chaos even has President Obama weighing in. Here's correspondent Lana Zach with the details.
They can't handle a bunch of CNBC moderators.
Overnight, President Obama poking fun at GOP presidential candidates and their debate demands.
If you can't handle those guys, then I don't think the Chinese and the Russians are going to be too worried about you.
After initially banding together, the Republican alliance is coming apart at the seams. Donald Trump says he prefers to negotiate for himself.
Look, I just want to answer the questions and be done with it.
Also refusing to sign on, John Kasich, Chris Christie, and Carly Fiorina, whose campaign has opted out of the debate controversy from the start, choosing, quote, dinner at the Applebee's in Pella, Iowa instead. And now Ben Carson, abandoned by many of his fellow contenders, on the defensive when asked if his campaign-led debate reforms are backfiring.
Yeah, that's a bunch of garbage. I don't deal with that kind of stuff.
Carson pushing forward with demands that include no gotcha lightning rounds, no show of hands questions, and a requirement that the temperature remain below 67 degrees. As Republicans debate the next debate, another poll shows Carson in the lead today. 6 points ahead of Trump nationwide, Marco Rubio in third place with 11%, and Ted Cruz and Jeb Bush rounding out the top 5.
Based off of this most recent poll, the same 10 candidates are likely to share the stage for the main debate, whatever form that takes, though Governor Bobby Jindal may drop off entirely, even from the undercard debate. Lana Zach, ABC News, Washington.
And joining us now to discuss all of this political chaos is our senior political reporter, Scott Duman. And Scott joins us from our Capitol Hill Bureau this morning. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning, Melanie. I think you put it right by saying we've got to sort through the chaos on this one.
After what really looked to be a Republican consensus over the debate rules, they got their heads together Sunday night in a private meeting, and they all came up with a consensus. We're going to support these new debate rules. But that's all fallen apart now?
Yeah, it looks like there's still some dissension about how that should happen. And, of course, remember, you're dealing with a lot of moving parts here. So what happened was Sunday evening you had representatives from most of the campaigns meeting at a hotel in Alexandria in Old Town and discussing exactly what parameters, what rules they would like set forth for all of the future debates. And they were going to present this letter. If they could all agree to it and sign off on it, they were going to then send it to all of the TV networks that are hosting debates in the future. Essentially, here are the rules that we're willing to ascribe to, and if you want to host the debate, this is how it's going to have to go. There's been some dissension among the ranks, though, because they can't all agree on a lot of the terms. Some basic things they do want. They want opening and closing remarks and a certain amount of time dedicated for those. They all, for the most part, seem to like the idea of a 2-hour time limit. But look, there's still a big argument over who gets on the stage. I mean, you mentioned it in that piece prior to tossing to us here in the Bureau, that you have other people who are now thinking about sitting out the undercard events because they feel that it does them a disservice. So Bobby Jindal, for example, may not, according to some reports, take part in the next one. So, Melanie, they can't really sort out some of this until the field is winnowed down, because if you're going to have 14, 15 candidates, the other people who are considered on that prior event, the undercard event, are always going to feel cheated. So some are suggesting a lottery type format. How about you pick randomly 7 people for the first, 7 for the second, and see that there's some sort of parity that way?
Yeah, and among those requests about the debates, I think it was Ben Carson, that was one of his ideas was to keep the temperature in the room controlled at something like 67 degrees.
67 degrees, right.
So maybe some of this was being perceived as petty, picayune, and maybe some people didn't want to sign on to that?
To some degree, I'm sure. And look, the networks want to be able to have final say in how a debate goes down. We have to point out, though, this is nothing new. You know, for decades, there have been discussions about everything as you know, you might say trivial, but important to the candidates as the temperature in the room, so they're not sweating, comfort level, the size of the podiums. All these things actually come up for debate pre-debate. So it's not out of the ordinary. But the difference this time around, perhaps, Melanie, is you have these candidates who feel that they have a bit more power maybe than previous ones. Look, at the ratings that we've seen in the first 3 GOP debates, you had 25 million, then you had 24 million. This most recent one that was held on CNBC, which you would imagine you're going to have a little bit lower of an audience. It's also the third debate, so some of the excitement or novelty may have worn off for some viewers. And it was going up against the World Series, still got 14 million viewers. So the candidates believe that they have the ability to tell the networks, hey, we're bringing in the dollars in advertising rates here, so we should have a greater say in how the debates are handled. And they just don't like the idea of having someone that they consider to be a liberal attack moderator. That's what they accuse CNBC of doing. They say, if you want to have Democrats moderate reports or debates, for other Democrats, fine. And we should have Republicans doing it for Republican events.
And the next debate will be hosted by Fox Business, so they may be a little bit happier with that forum. You know, I wanted to know who was the first one, Scott, to pull away from these debate rules that were agreed upon. Was it Trump?
Well, you know, Trump's the loudest about it. I don't know that he was the first. When I spoke with someone over at the Republican National Committee just prior to the Boulder, Colorado debate, this most recent one that was held for the Republicans last week, what they had to say, the RNC, is that there were these ongoing but tense negotiations between the network, between NBC, and the Republican candidates. They didn't like that, for example, CNBC initially didn't want to have opening remarks. They said, we're just going to get right into the questions. People know who you are by now. Let's get to the content. The candidates don't like that. They want to be able to welcome the crowd, get off a firing point right away that's of their choosing. So there was some fighting right away. Now, Donald Trump was said to be among those who were discontent with the proposed rules by CNBC. But I was told by RNC people that it was not just Trump, it was not just Carson, it was multiple candidates. So I think there is a bit of a unified front. It's just that Trump is probably the most vocal about them.
I'm sure he's the most vocal. And you know, one of the things that he was against was having to stand on stage for so long. And he wanted a time limit. I think the last time they were up there for 3 hours standing, and he wanted it limited to 2 hours.
Yeah, and it's understandable. You watch these things, and even as a viewer, it can be difficult for 3 hours, and you're on your couch, right? So if you're standing up there behind the lectern and you're having to defend yourself, think about policy, whatever it may be, 3 hours is a long time. There's no arguing that. The irony in all of this is that all of the candidates almost universally complain that they're not getting enough airtime to talk. So they are upset that they're limited to 30 seconds or a minute for some of these responses, and they go way over the time. The moderator tries to keep them reined in, unsuccessfully typically, and then the candidates complain afterward that they didn't get to express their viewpoints properly, or they can't get into certain serious material matters like their plans for health care, the economy, or jobs, or taxes. And so they say we don't have enough time, but at the same time, they're upset that it's you know, going to be possibly more than 2 hours, and they say we won't take part if it is.
And along those lines, I believe it was Trump in that last debate that was limited to something like 8 or 9 minutes of speaking compared to an earlier debate where he spoke a lot more. So certainly by having the opening statement and the closing statement, each candidate would be able to have to say their fair piece.
Right, they have a little more liberty there, but you know, you mentioned Trump's time being somewhere in the 8 and 9 minute range. I mean, others, Jeb Bush, 7 minutes. He was in the 7 minute range, 6 and 7 minute range. Same with Carson, who had just come out on top in the most recent poll. So everyone was expecting to hear big things from him because it was the first time he was the front runner in a national poll. So 7 minutes from the supposed front runner. I mean, it is a difficult synopsis when you have 15 candidates. So it's a bit of a circus now, but if you imagine 6 months from now when you may only have 6 candidates or so, maybe 7 or 8, but certainly I would imagine under 10 after we get through a couple of the initial, the caucus and the first couple of primaries, you know, it's going to find itself whittled down to a more respectable amount, and the debates should be handled a little more smoothly.
Let's talk a little bit about the latest polls, and Ben Carson surging in the latest poll conducted by the Wall Street Journal and NBC News. It shows him with 29% to Trump's 23%. So they're 1 and 2. And then in third and fourth place, everybody's in the 10-11 range. So you've got Marco Rubio coming in at 11% and Ted Cruz at 10%. And then Jeb Bush in the 8% range right now, according to that poll. Is this pretty much reflective of what all the polls are saying now?
Yeah, it is par for the course with a lot of them. It's one of the more thorough ones that we've seen initially after the debate. And what's interesting about this poll is it's reflecting some of the same trend that we saw prior to the debate. So, for example, Ben Carson being ahead of Trump, the first time we saw that was just prior to that Boulder, Colorado debate. Now we're seeing it even after the debate, staying true to form. That 29 to 23%, though, still pretty close to a margin of error, so it's not like you can expect that suddenly we're seeing this major shift in the political landscape, but it certainly is some difference, and it's something that the campaigns are seizing on. It's probably also why we're seeing Donald Trump fire off a little bit more at Ben Carson now. But Melanie, you do see a bit of a bump for Marco Rubio, for Ted Cruz, who a lot of critics and supporters say had relatively strong performances in this past debate. And then Jeb Bush getting a little bit of a bump, finally up to 8%, but he's still struggling, still in single digits. He had to let go of some of his staff a week and a half ago. So he's trying to hit the reset button every time you see him on a new event or some sort of rally. He's trying to evoke some of the emotion and some of the energy that a lot of people say he's lacking. But that's a difficult challenge for someone like Jeb Bush. It's just perhaps not in his wheelhouse as much as it is with other candidates.
And he actually headed home to Florida to sort of reboot his campaign. He's got his new Jeb Can Fix It tour coming up. He's going to be taking it to a few of the early states. But what is wrong with his campaign, and what does he need to do to turn things around right now, Scott?
Melanie, I don't know that. I think it's based a lot on expectations. If he didn't have the last name, if he didn't have the political history he did, I don't think that people would see it as such a disappointment at this point. Look, I covered him for all 8 years that he was governor in Florida, and his style is not terribly different now than it was then, and he was successful as a governor, and he was reelected, although he did lose his first time attempting to become governor of Florida. But he's never been this high-energy, screaming from the podium, getting people out of their feet, cheering and going crazy kind of politician. It's just not his MO. He's always been a little bit quieter, a little more calculated. He doesn't believe in the quick soundbite. He likes to express himself in long format, and he says that that's to his credit because it means he's a little more of a thoughtful candidate.
But he does admit he needs to get better at the debates.
He does.
Some of his handlers are actually telling him he needs to ditch his glasses and get different ties, which it makes me remember a time, remember when Al Gore was running for president?
Absolutely.
All of a sudden he showed up in like earth tones.
He hired an image consultant. This was Al Gore when he decided to run. I think her name was Naomi Wolf, if I remember correctly, and he was told he needed to be more of an alpha male. He started wearing different clothes.
Yes, he did.
He had all those fall colors and the turtleneck issue. I mean, the whole thing was about trying to change his image. The difference with Al Gore was interesting. Look, when he was vice president, Al Gore was, I believe, a much more captivating speaker. I thought he did quite a fine job. It was once he decided he was going to be a presidential candidate that people started to equate him with a little more of a robotic tone, because he was he was trying to be very presidential, and so there was a lot of effort that was visible. When he just spoke from the heart as VP, I think he was probably a little more effective. So these candidates, they get into a race and they try to become what they think they need to be to win over the voters and the viewers, and sometimes that's taking a bit of a distant walk from who they typically are, and it's uncomfortable for them.
Well, we hope you'll hang on just a minute, Scott. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be back with more News Talk right after this.